Radiohead's most famous performance happened before many of their most beloved songs were ever even written. And you probably already know the one I'm talking about. MTV Beach House is this perfect, ridiculous little synthesis of the channel's obsession with seeming even cooler than itself. It's just a splash of summer programming, but its obsession with 90s slacker attitudes contrasted with reports that it was populated by out-of-touch rich kids and hosted in the Hamptons.
Stay out of the pool. Don't treat this like the city pool it is. I hate when these kids come out here and pee in the pool.
To say that Radiohead, as we understand them today, don't really belong at MTV Beach House would be an understatement. From his excellent book, This Isn't Happening, about Radiohead's fourth album, Kid A, Stephen Hyden observes, every now and then they would host some horribly incongruous act who definitely did not belong amid the muscle-bound bros and string bikinied babes. This is where Radiohead comes in. First-person accounts of this performance are a little difficult to come by, save for a few old blogs and what I read in various books for this video, but as the story goes, Radiohead are at MTV Beach House to play their breakout hit, Creep, and once they finish, they burst into an impromptu performance of Anyone Can Play Guitar, which ends up being what actually gets aired on TV. Destiny, protect me from the world. The song ends in this eruption of rock star excess, with stoic onlookers watching while Tom wails into the camera. Johnny nearly rips the strings clean off of his guitar, and during this whirlwind of dissonant sounds, Tom jumps into a nearby pool. It's shortly after this happens, as a blog post from someone reportedly there on the day would later reveal, that Tom York nearly drowns. As soon as he jumps in the pool, his Doc Martens start to fill up with water, and the few people on set who aren't captivated by the wailing, crushing walls of distorted guitar sounds reverberating throughout the entire beach house notice that Tom York's kicking off the bottom of the pool, struggling for air. Tom York is not yet the frontman of the greatest band in the world. He's not yet a spirited auteur, political activist, industry rebel, or astonishingly acclaimed musician. Right now, Tom York is performing songs he'll later admit he hates for people he doesn't care about. Right now, Tom York is playing rockstar dress-up, feigning a rockstar attitude, and falling victim to rockstar antics. Right now, Tom York is sinking to the bottom of a pool. It's allegedly pure coincidence that he's already begun work on a new album called The Bends. There is an actual reason why The Bends is called The Bends. The band, Tom and Johnny in particular, are really uncomfortable with the massive rise in popularity following Creep, and it comes up more than a few times on this album. So they chose to compare it to the sensation that divers experience when resurfacing too quickly, the bends. I think this is pretty fascinating to observe in retrospect because, of course, Radiohead has so much more room to grow. When the Bends released, Radiohead was just 2 years away from OK Computer, the most acclaimed album since Sgt. Pepper. Then they would turn around and subvert expectations again 3 years later with a massively influential follow-up in Kid A, which has arguably grown to be even more acclaimed. Further albums like the Pay What You Want in Rainbows and hauntingly self-reflective A Moon-Shaped Pool help to build this mystique, an impenetrable mystique around Radiohead. They aren't just one of the greatest bands in the world. They aren't just one of the most acclaimed bands in the world. They're Radiohead. And make no mistake, this mystique is not applied in universally positive ways. Take 2001's Amnesiac as a case study. Some fans see this record as the band's actual masterpiece, hiding in plain sight, and others see it as glorified Kid A leftovers. This also applies to the band's notoriously unloved debut album, Pablo Honey. which became so popular to hate on as the band grew more acclaimed that it developed its own fan base of diehard followers.
The one that everybody talks about when they hear Radiohead, they associate Radiohead with Creep. Right. And perhaps people saw you as sort of one-hit wonders at the time.
But somehow the Bins has found a way to avoid these levels of intrigue, avoid falling into the whirlpool of this mystique. It features emotional moments, but compared to the sobering meditation of a record like A Moon-Shaped Pool or Hail to the Thief, it's not quite as poignant. It's also not a dramatic advancement of the band's sound like Kid A or In Rainbows. It's fundamentally a 90s alternative rock record, but, it isn't the genre-defying masterpiece that would come just 2 years later. So what is the Bins? Like, as an album, what is it? Tom York and Johnny Greenwood really don't want to follow up Creep. So they don't. Lead single My Iron Lung is released famously as an attempt to divert from Creep, despite the fact that, in retrospect, it doesn't really feel all that far off from the alt-rock stylings of their debut. It's farther off than Just, though. Oh, you do it to yourself, you do. That's why it is. The fourth single from the Bins is called Just, and it is the record's most Pablo Honey song, though in my opinion it easily clears anything from that record. Despite its alternative rock demeanor, kick-ass guitar solo, and similar success to the previous Radiohead singles on the UK charts, this thing never touches the Hot 100. What it did reach was MTV, where it kind of became a cult hit for its evocative and fascinating music video. According to Mac Randall's book, Exit Music, The Radiohead Story, the response garnered by the video altered the promotional game plan for the next real US single, High and Dry. Though a video already existed for that song, Capitol deemed it not nearly as interesting as the Just video. So let's talk about this album's most contentious single. If not its most contentious song overall, High and Dry. I wouldn't exactly call the Bins a wildly innovative album, but it is very evocative. Though if there's an exception, it's High and Dry. In my opinion, this song just kind of sees Radiohead flirting with some of their least interesting ambitions. I wouldn't call it a boring song, but it's very Oasis-esque and aligned with a lot of the alt-rock and Britpop at the time that was hit or miss even in its best moments. Also, it sounds more like Coldplay than most Coldplay songs. An essay written by Ed Power celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Bins begins like this. The first time Tom York, Radiohead's frontman, heard Coldplay's song Yellow, he put his head in his hands, sighed, and whispered, "What have I done?" Now, don't get me wrong, I kinda like Coldplay, especially Rush of Blood to the Head and X and Y, but I don't know, the listless, alt-rocky, almost post-grunginess of High and Dry being the biggest hit from this album is something that has just always rubbed me the wrong way. Biggest hit in the sense that it's the only song from this album and one of only 3 Radiohead songs ever to chart on the American Hot 100, and it still sits as the Bins' most streamed song on Spotify today. In fact, High and Dry has over 100,000 more streams than one of the most acclaimed and beloved songs on the entire album, Fake Plastic Trees. Speaking of which, sometimes I like to picture Fake Plastic Trees as the good Kermit and High and Dry as the evil Kermit. I originally wrote 2 entire paragraphs explaining why I like Fake Plastic Trees so much, but somehow I think this image says everything I wanted to say and more. What do you want from me? I mean, Tom's falsetto is patient and beautiful, and he used to do plastic surgery for girls in the 80s, but gravity always wins is one of my favorite Radiohead lyrics ever. But honestly, the Bins does have a masterpiece, a true masterpiece. Indisputably, I think. And as much as we talk about Paranoid Android, Idiotech, Pyramid Song, True Love Waits, we should be talking about Street Spirit. The The Bins' fifth single, Street Spirit Fade Out, is also its closing track, and it is shattering. The song deploys the kind of brutal and cutting pessimism that would go on to define so many of Radiohead's most brooding and minimal moments. Take the third verse, which reads, "Cracked eggs, dead birds, scream as they fight for life. I can feel death, can see its beady eyes. All these things into position. All these things will one day swallow whole." To indulge in an extremely painful cliche, I think Street Spirit is kind of the moment that Radiohead becomes Radiohead. From a shift away from the literal into their uncomfortable and evocative metaphors, to their exploration of bold, expansive sonic spaces while maintaining patience and nuance, and even their drive to tackle some of the most despondent, harrowing, and dramatic emotions that human beings can feel. It's all here on Street Spirit. And I think it's the first song in Radiohead's discography that really predicts the next 30 years of what the band would go on to do. So, okay, let's zoom out a bit. When I sat down to write about the Bins, I didn't really even have a thesis the way that I do for most video essays. I just feel bizarrely compelled to write about this album when it comes on. I have so many thoughts about Street Spirit and Fake Plastic Trees and deep cuts from the record that have stuck with me over the years, even as so many hundreds of thousands of songs I've heard elsewhere have completely faded. One argument I'm definitely not here to make is that the Bins is some kind of underrated or understudied gem. It's a fucking Radiohead album. The Bins alone has had more written about it than most bands will in their entire career. But I don't know. Shit, does every video essay have to be about the meaning of life? Can a girl just write about Black Star? You guys have heard Black Star, right? By virtue of being an album that came out in 1995, 7 of the Bins' 12 songs were released as singles, and the remaining 5 are a supremely weird bunch. My favorite is, of course, Black Star, a pretty beloved deep cut. Okay, well, it's fucking Radiohead. All of their deep cuts are beloved. But Black Star in particular is this amazing, roaring alt-rock ballad that lyrically explores how difficult it can be to empathize with someone who is experiencing serious mental health issues. And I think it's a song that has aged both sonically and lyrically incredibly well. I also love Sulk, which has a really fascinating backstory, again from Randall's book Exit Music. Sulk was written by Tom in the summer of 1987 in response to a bloody incident that shocked the United Kingdom. 27-year-old Michael Ryan's senseless shooting spree on August 19th of that year, which left 17 people dead. Originally, the song ended with the line, "Just shoot your gun," but Tom changed this later to "You'll never change," not wanting anyone to think he'd been writing about Nirvana's Kurt Cobain. There's also Bones, a song that is kind of about your bones hurting, which is something I'm sure I'll come to relate to more and more as I get older. Bulletproof, I Wish I Was, is another moment that sees Radiohead sounding as 90s as ever, and yet the angsty wails about wishing you were emotionally stronger, I think at least predicts the way that the band will go on to tackle similar subjects with more maturity in the future. And finally, there's Nice Dream. If High and Dry is your favorite single from this record, Nice Dream. In one sense, the Bins absolutely is a stepping stone, both to OK Computer and to everything that Radiohead would go on to do afterwards. But it isn't just a stepping stone. Haha, just like forget it. It really genuinely, honestly did take me this long of writing this video essay to understand what it even was that I wanted to talk about with the Bins in the first place. And that's the perception of both this album and this legendary, famous, and infamous band, and how that perception has changed over time. When Tom York nearly drowns at the MTV Beach House, It isn't just that Radiohead are a far cry from the band they are today. It's inconceivable that they could ever even get there. Here's a snippet from the video by the always excellent Todd in the Shadows.
Radiohead is the most nailed-on, dead-to-rights one-hit wonder that ever existed.
But I'm a creep.
They have no business existing after 1993.
And this little piece from a retrospective on The Bins written by Tyler Dunston for Consequence. The Bins was the album that forced critics and listeners alike to take them seriously. In a sense, it was the beginning of Radiohead as we know them today. However, as inevitable as it may seem in retrospect, it was anything but at the time. What I wanted to say with this video all along is that The Bins wasn't inevitable. It does function as a stepping stone on a path to OK Computer and Kid A, but it's worth remembering that that wasn't the only thing it ever could have been. I think it's easy to look back on The Bins in retrospect with knowledge of the next 30 years of Radiohead's career and judge it as a modest, inarticulate, safe, and perhaps even mainstream album. And it's impossible to imagine a time when fucking Radiohead, had to fight just to be taken seriously. But The Bins wasn't a merely modest and predictable step on the road to the Radiohead we know today. The Bins was, of course, a radical rejection of the reputation Radiohead had at the time, which saw them as just one drop in a sea of synonymously uninspired and unambitious grunge and alternative rock bands. The Bins is a bold step forward for a rock band that had more talent and bigger ideas than anyone around them could have possibly believed. We know now that The Bins absolutely did help both critics and fans take Radiohead more seriously as artists, as well as setting the table for OK Computer to be the most universally acclaimed album in decades. But there was absolutely no guarantee that it was going to work. To get to OK Computer, to get to Kid A, to get to In Rainbows, A Moon-Shaped Pool, Johnny Greenwood's soundtrack work, Tom York's solo albums, The Smile, Atoms for Peace, The Bins kind of had to work. This sober, somber, occasionally understated, sometimes brash, sometimes gentle, curious little sophomore effort had to work. It had to work in sparking critical intrigue in Radiohead as artists and not just the guys who made Creep. It had to work in garnering the early stages of a fan base that would follow Radiohead devoutly to more ambitious and experimental places. The Bins did work perfectly. And because of that, we have it to thank for every single wonderful, stunning, amazing moment that Radiohead has delivered ever since.